Hey guys, my name is JC and we're back again playing the deck you guys really want to see played, Ratadrabik of Urborg. This is a deck that aims to make multiple copies of legendary creatures through sacrifice and reanimation to overwhelm its opponents. If you want to see how this deck was made, then make sure to stop by the channel where we have a deck tech discussing all of the included cards as well as the overall strategy. Let's see if multiple legendary copies is enough to get the job done. Alright guys, let's see who we're playing today. We have Runetail Kitsune Ascendant. We have Plarg Dean of Chaos with Augusta Dean of Order on the flip side. And we also have Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. Alright, if we have a look at our opening hand, I like it quite a bit. We've got Reanimation. We have some Ramp. We also have a nice little bit of interaction and card draw. So I think we can keep this. Rune starts us off by playing a land for turn. And now they cast an Authority of the Consoles. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. And that's it for their turn. Plarg plays a fetch land. They crack it straight away. They put a plateau into play. And they end the turn there. Freyalise plays a land for turn. And now they cast an Elvish Reclaimer. That triggers Authority of the Consoles, so the Rune player gains a life. Elvish Reclaimer gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard, and you can pay 2, tap, sack a land, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And that is it for them. We draw a Loyal Warhound for turn, so another piece of ramp. So let's just start by playing our plains for turn, and then we'll pass it over. Rune plays another land for turn, and now they cast a Lunarch Veteran. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And its flip side is whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, you gain 1 life. And they also play a Giver of Runes. Tap it, another target creature you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. And that is it for the Rune player. Now at their end step, it looks like we have a response. The Plarg player casts a Path to Exile targeting the Giver of Runes. So it looks like they don't want the Rune player to have protection. That will allow the Rune player, however, to search their library for a basic land card and put it into play, which they do. And now we move to the Plarg player's turn. Plarg plays a land for turn. And now they cast Goblin Bomb. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may flip a coin. If you win the flip, put a fuse counter on Goblin Bomb. If you lose the flip, remove the fuse counter from it. Remove 5 fuse counters from Goblin Bomb and sacrifice it. It deals 20 damage to target player or planeswalker. Okay, that looks like quite a fun little card there. Freyalise plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. And now they cast a Scoot Swarm. Whenever a land ETB is under your control, create a 1/1 insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. That does trigger Authority of the Consoles, gaining them another life. They move to combat, sending the Elvish Reclaimer towards the Rune player. They just take the damage, and that is it for the Freyalise player. We draw a Relic of Legends for turn. So let's play our Fetid Heath. And I think we'll get our Felwar Stone down. I don't think we need to get Ellasil Core in just yet. And then we'll pass the turn from there. Rune starts by casting a Weathered Wayfarer. Pay white, tap it, search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Activate only if an opponent controls more lands than you. That triggers their Lunarch Veteran, gaining them 1 life. And now they cast Endless Atlas. 2 tap, draw a card only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. And that is it for them. Goblin Bomb triggers on the Plarg player's upkeep. It looks like they lose the flip. They don't get to put a fuse counter onto Goblin Bomb. Now they play a land for turn. And now they cast Smoke. Players can't untap more than 1 creature during their untap steps. To be honest, I've never played against that card before. Luckily for us, I don't think it's going to matter for most of the game. We don't tend to go to combat until the very end when we know we've got it, or we do have other ways of winning. But that should be interesting with the other players. And that is it for their turn. Freyalise plays a land for turn. That does trigger their Scoot Swarm. That also triggers Authority of the Consoles, gaining Runetail 1 life. Now they cast Survival of the Fittest. Green, discard a creature card, search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And that is it for them. We draw Jiahao Dun. So what we'll do to start off with, we'll play our Loyal Warhound. That triggers Authority of the Consoles, gaining Runetail a life. Now we'll search our library for a Plains card, it'll come into play tapped. Next we'll follow that up by playing our Urborg. And now we'll get down our Ellasil Core. That triggers Authority of the Consoles once again. And then we're going to pass the turn from there. Runetail starts by activating Weathered Wayfarer. Let's see what land they get here. They find themselves in Emeria the Sky Ruin, which they do play. And now they activate their Endless Atlas, drawing themselves a card. And they end the turn there. On Plarg's upkeep, Goblin Bomb triggers. This time they win the flip, so it gets a fuse counter. Now they play a land for turn. And now they play Chaos Sphere. It's a wild enchantment. Creatures with flying can block only creatures with flying, and creatures without flying have reach. Okay, so we definitely have a chaotic deck here. It's going to make the game very interesting. Let's see if it works out for us. At the very least, having a lot of the creatures coming into play tapped and then staying tapped means our life total isn't going to be pressured too much, which is always appreciated in a black deck. On the end step, however, the Freyalise player does activate their Elvish Reclaimer. They're going to search their library for a land and put it onto the battlefield, and they find themselves a Gaia's Cradle, always a welcome sight in a green deck. That does trigger Scoot Swarm, and that also triggers Authority of the Consoles. And now we move to the Freyalise player's turn, which, judging by that Gaia's Cradle entering the battlefield, they're going to be in a pretty good position here, at least mana-wise. Freyalise starts by casting Sylvan Scrying. Search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And it looks like they find themselves a Deserted Temple. That also triggers Scoot Swarm. And that also triggers Authority of the Consoles. So now they tap their Gaia's Cradle for 5 mana. They activate their Reclaimer once again. Sacking a land and now searching for one to put onto the battlefield. They find themselves a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. That triggers Scoot Swarm. That also triggers Authority of the Consoles. So now Runetail's currently on 49 life. Now they use their Deserted Temple to untap their Gaia's Cradle. And when they tap that down, they have access to 8 mana in total. And now we finally see them cast their commander, Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. +2, make a 1/1 green elf druid creature token with tap add green. -2, destroy target artifact or enchantment, which it looks like they're currently upticking to make an elf. And the ultimate is draw a card for each green creature you control. So with all the access they have to mana, as soon as they get that card draw ability off, they're going to be zooming ahead of the rest of the table. That also triggers Authority of the Consoles. So the Freyalise player is definitely our biggest threat at the moment. And now the Freyalise player also activates their Survival of the Fittest. It looks like they find themselves a Regal Force, so they've already got their card draw taken care of. That's going to draw them a lot of cards when they play it next turn. And that is it for the Freyalise player. We're going to untap our Loyal Warhound because it does have Vigilance. And we draw a land for turn. So we'll start by playing that land. Next we'll cast our Relic of Legends. And after that we'll cast our Morbid Opportunist. That triggers Authority of the Consoles and our Ellysil Core. So Runetail will gain a life, we'll also gain a life. Now we'll move to combat. We'll swing at Freyalise to help keep her off that card draw ability. That knocks her down to 2 loyalty. And from there we'll pass the turn. So at least now if a board wipe does happen, we'll be able to draw a card off Morbid Opportunist or even some spot removal. So we just have to keep our fingers crossed that we see that happen. Runetail starts by activating their Weathered Wayfarer. So we're definitely seeing a lot of land tutor in this game. They find themselves a Wasteland. Well, that's a good answer to the Gaia's Cradle. They play that Wasteland for turn. They immediately activate it and they do target the Gaia's Cradle here. So the mono white player definitely saving the table some grief. Next, they activate their Endless Atlas, drawing a card. And they are going to leave the turn there. Goblin Bomb triggers on Plarg's upkeep. They lose the flip, so it loses the counter on it, going back down to 0. They play a Strip Mine for turn. And now they cast a Wheel of Misfortune. Each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater, then all players reveal the numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards the hand and draws 7 cards. A wheel is absolutely what we want to see in this deck. Because we do have a heavy reanimation sub-theme, it means we're going to easily be able to get back Jia How Done or anything that we do discard, and importantly, it's going to help refill our hand here, so very happy to see it. We can gain quite a bit of life here with Ellysil Core, so we'll play it safe and we're going to go up to 10 life. Luckily that resolves. And we do draw quite a number of lands here, but at least we finally find a sack outlet and a legendary creature. So now Plarg also cast their commander, Plarg, Dean of Chaos. Tap, discard a card, draw a card. Then you can pay 5, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all cards revealed not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. That does trigger Authority of the Consoles. That gains Runetail a life. And that is it for them. Freyalise starts by playing a fetch land for turn. That does trigger Scoot Swarm. It also triggers Authority of the Consoles. Now they crack that fetch land. That's going to put a land into play and make another insect. That also triggers Authority of the Consoles. Next they activate Freyalise, making a 1/1 druid. That enters the battlefield tap thanks to Authority of the Consoles. And that is it for their turn. We're going to untap Eldersil Core because we're able to use it as a mana dork thanks to Relic of Legends. And we draw Cauldron of Souls for turn. Well, let's start by playing Command Tower. Next, we're going to cast our Commander. That triggers Authority of the Consoles and our Eldersil Core. So Runetail gains a life. We also gain a life. Now, we could get down Sir Conrad here, but with a white player at the table having exile effects potentially, I want to be able to make sure that our creatures do hit the graveyard instead of exile. So we'll play our Carrion Feeder. That'll trigger Authority and Eldersil Core. And finally, we'll cast our Altar of Dementia, just in case we lose one of our sack outlets. Now, let's see if we can draw some cards. We're going to swing at Freyalise once again. If they block with their Elf token, then we'll be able to draw a card thanks to our Morbid Opportunist. And it looks like they do throw it in front. Good news for us. So we lose our Loyal Warhound, they lose their Dork. That does trigger Morbid Opportunist and our Eldersil Core. So each opponent is going to lose a life from that exchange. Then we'll draw a card. A Volrath Stronghold. That's good recursion on a land. And then we'll pass the turn over. Runetail starts by casting a Soul Ring. Next, they activate their Weathered Wayfarer. They find themselves an idyllic Grange. Now they play the Grange. And it looks like they target their Lunarch Veteran here to gain the 1/1 counter. And now we finally see their commander come down. Runetail Kitsune Ascendant. When you have 30 or more life, flip it. And then when it does get flipped, prevent all damage that would be dealt to creatures you control. That does trigger their Lunarch Veteran. And because they definitely have 30 or more life, Runetail flips straight away. So now their creatures can't be hurt. And finally, they finish that up with the Drannith Magistrate. Well, luckily we got our commander into play early enough. That does trigger their Lunarch Veteran. It gains them another life. Now they do move to combat and they are swinging at Freyalise. So they want to keep her loyalty down. And that will take it down to 2 loyalty once the combat damage goes through. Unless the green player does have a response. It looks like they don't. And that is it for their turn. Goblin Bomb triggers on Plarg's upkeep. They win the flip, so it gains a fuse counter. Now they play a land for turn. And next they cast a Smothering Tithe. Never good to see on an opponent's side of the board. But fortunately for us at the moment, the Plarg player is probably the least of our worries. Being a chaotic deck, you never know if they're going to be helping or hurting you. Now they move to combat and they're also swinging in at Freyalise. So that should take her down unless the Freyalise player has a response. They're able to flash something in or possibly beast within it. And it looks like Freyalise is down, so we won't be seeing her again until the Drannith Magistrate is removed. And that is it for the Plarg player. Now on their end step, Freyalise does activate Survival of the Fittest. Looks like they find themselves a Ramunap Excavator. So that is going to be able to get their Gaia's Cradle back. That's going to be pretty bad news for the table. Now they draw a card that does trigger Smothering Tithe. And they don't pay for it. Now they play the Ramunap Excavator. That triggers Authority of the Consoles. That also triggers their Scoot Swarm to make an insect token. In response, the Plarg player activates their Strip Mine, targeting the Gaia's Cradle. So they will be able to still make the mana off it here, but they're only going to be able to do it once. At least for this turn until they can do it again next turn. So they tap it down for 11 mana. Now they use the Deserted Temple to untap the Gaia's Cradle. So they're going to have more than enough mana to do whatever they need to do this turn. They retap it again, taking them up to 20 total mana. And now we see them cast Tooth and Nail. Search your library for up to 2 creature cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. Or put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Alright, well in some decks this is a 1-card win con. In other ones it's just a high value play. So let's see what it ends up being for the Freyalise player. And it looks like they put an Eternal Witness into play and a Spearbreaker Behemoth. That triggers Authority of the Consoles 2 times as well as Eternal Witness. And it looks like they are returning their Tooth and Nail to do that again, which they will be able to with 11 mana floating. So we see the Tooth and Nail come out again. It's probably very fortunate all these creatures are tapped down, otherwise we probably would have seen a Crater Hoof Behemoth come in. And it looks like they get a Bane of Progress and an Apex Altasaur. Authority of the Consoles triggers twice, so does Apex Altasaur and Bane of Progress. So let's see where the fight trigger goes with Apex Altasaur first before we respond. Well, it looks like they are targeting the Drannith Magistrate as the first fight target. Now they also activate their Spearbreaker Behemoth. Target creature with power 5 or greater gains indestructible until end of turn. So that's essentially going to make Apex Altasaur a board wipe, a one-sided one for them. Unfortunately for the Freyalise player, they probably forgot that the mono white player can't actually lose their creatures because their commander prevents all damage to them. So now they target our Eldersil Core. In response, we're going to sacrifice it and start milling ourselves. By doing that, it'll also stop the Apex Altasaur's trigger if it can't fight it. So They probably should have at least targeted the Plarg player first. That triggers Morbid Opportunist and Ratadrabik. So we're going to draw a card from the Morbid Opportunist. It looks like we have a response from the Plarg player. They're floating mana at the moment. We draw a Shizo, Death Storehouse. That triggers Smothering Tithe. We won't be able to pay, so they get to make a treasure. Ratadrabik makes a token copy of Elixir Core. That triggers Authority of the Consoles. Looks like Plarg also sacks that treasure, making extra mana. Now we mill ourselves. Just 2 lands. Well, that was good to clear off the top of our library. That's definitely not going to help us with what's going on the board over there. So now the Apex Altasaur's trigger fizzles. And now the Bane of Progress resolves. And after that massive turn, that is it for the Freyalise player. And from the looks of things, we may have one more turn before the green player takes us all out. So one of us is going to have to try to find some answer to what they're doing over there. And the high market we drew definitely wasn't it. And Elishnor would have been a beautiful draw. So we'll start by playing our Volrath Stronghold for turn. And next we're going to cast our Sir Conrad the Grim. That way if the board does get wiped, there's going to be a lot of damage thrown around to our opponents. That triggers our Elixir Core, we gain a life. Let's sack Sir Conrad here to draw a card. That's going to trigger Elixir Core, our Commander and Morbid Opportunist. Just want to see if we draw a reanimation spell here. Oh, Sheoldred. I mean, Sheoldred wasn't going to do much against the green player anyway, so... But if we do manage to survive to our next turn, that's going to be a very useful card. Elixir Core gains us a life, then each opponent loses a life thanks to Elixir Core. And Carrion Feeder gets a +1/+1 counter. We'll move to combat. We'll send what we can at the Freyalise player. All of our creatures have Vigilance thanks to our Commander because they are zombie tokens. That knocks them down to 26. And unfortunately, we're just going to have to leave it there and we put our fate into our opponent's hands. Rune starts by playing a land for turn. And now they cast Farewell. Probably the worst board wipe that we usually see, but luckily for us, we do have a sack outlet online. And with what's going on with the green player, that is actually an answer. So we're going to respond here. We'll start by using our Carrion Feeder. We're going to sacrifice our Commander. We'll actually put our Commander back into the command zone. We'll put a bunch of triggers on the stack. So let's draw a card. Allurus of the Dream Dead. Well, that is good recursion. Each opponent loses a life thanks to Elixir Core. So Conrad also triggers twice. Carrion Feeder gets a counter. Now let's sack Morbid Opportunist. This is going to trigger Sir Conrad and Elixir Core again. Now we'll sack Elixir Core. Now trigger Sir Conrad. Also Carrion Feeder. Finally, we'll sacrifice our Sir Conrad. And now we'll sacrifice Carrion Feeder to itself. Now, unfortunately on Moto, it doesn't actually show you what modes they've chosen there at the moment, but I'm assuming they are going to exile all graveyards anyway, so we're just doing this in case we did get lucky and maybe they chose not to exile the graveyards, which unfortunately we weren't so lucky. They did do that, but luckily that does bring us back into the game. And now having a Sheoldred in our hand does make me feel a lot more better. And that is it for the Runetail player. So it looks like the game goes on. Let's see who can come out ahead here after the board wipe though. That is the question. Funnily enough, out of all the players, we actually have the most lands on board. Plarg starts by playing a land for turn. Now they cast Moonblessed Cleric. When it ETBs, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. Alright, let's see what they find here. And they find themselves a Grip of Chaos. Whenever a spell or ability is put onto the stack, if it has a single target, reselect its target at random. Oh wow, that is definitely a chaotic card there. And that is it for them. Freyalise plays a land for turn. But it looks like they're just tapping their mana out and passing it over. So it looks like the green player's finally out of juice. We just draw a land for turn, unfortunately. At least we know we're definitely going to be making our land drops for turn. Let's start by playing our Shattered Sanctum. Next, we'll play our Cauldron of Souls. And finally, we'll cast our Lurrus of the Dream Den. I don't want to get Sheoldred out just yet. I want to get some more juicier targets coming down from the mono white and mono green player. And we're just going to pass it over from there. Runetail plays a land for turn. And now they play a Wandering Archaic. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. A good card, though. Let's see how useful it is in the mid to late game, where most of us do have a decent amount of mana to be able to pay for the ability. And that is it for their turn. Plarg plays a land for turn. And now they cast the Grip of Chaos. They decide to pass through combat, and then that is the end of their turn. Freyalise plays a land. And now they cast a Reclamation Sage. When it ETBs, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. It'll be interesting to see whether they target our Cauldron or the Grip of Chaos here. It could go either way. Now they are targeting the Grip of Chaos, but that does actually trigger the Grip of Chaos. So we might get unlucky and it actually redirects towards our Cauldron of Souls. And unfortunately it does. So we'll just activate it in response. We'll target Lurrus and the Moon-Blessed Cleric. They'll gain Persist until end of turn. And unfortunately we lose our Cauldron here. Next they activate their Deserted Temple, untapping their Yavimai's Cradle. But that does actually trigger the Grip of Chaos because it has a single target. And it actually ends up untapping our Plains. Always happy to see it. So already the Chaos enchantment's starting to do work. And that is it for the Freyalise player. Alright, let's keep our fingers crossed we have a good draw. Plague Crafter, not the worst in the world. Let's start by playing our High Market for turn, so we actually have a sack outlet on board. Next, let's cast our Plague Crafter. That resolves. So now each of our opponents are going to have to sacrifice a creature. We'll sacrifice Plague Crafter. Now we're going to move to combat. We'll send Lurrus towards the mono white player. That gains us some life back. And now we'll recast our commander. And that's going to be it for us for turn. Runetail starts by casting a Soul's Attendant. Whenever another creature ETBs, you may gain a life. Next they cast a Thalia, Heretic Cathar. First strike, creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. And that is it for them. Plarg plays a land for turn. And now they cast a Tali, Primal Storm. Whenever a Tali attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. That does trigger Soul's Attendant, gaining Runetail a life. Next up, they cast a Mana Crypt. And finally, they recast their commander, Plarg, Dean of Chaos. That triggers Soul's Attendant once again, gaining them a life. And that is it for their turn. Freyalise starts by playing a tap land for turn, an Arcane Lighthouse. Now they cast a Golden Argosy. Whenever it attacks, exile the creature that crewed it this turn, return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and it has crew 1. And that is it for the Freyalise player. We draw a Mana Rock for turn, which we're not too happy to see. We really want anything else besides mana and lands at the moment. So let's start by playing our Shizo for turn. That'll enter play tapped. Next we'll play our Talisman. And finally we're going to get our Sheoldred into play. We'll make sure to leave High Market up so we can sacrifice Sheoldred in response to any removal. That triggers Soul's Attendant, gaining Runetail 1 life. We'll move to combat. Our commander has Vigilance, so we're going to swing it towards the Plarg player. The damage goes through. And we're just going to pass the turn there. Sheoldred triggers on Runetail's upkeep. So it's most likely we see the Soul's Attendant leave here. And we do. Now they play a Bishop of Rebirth. When it attacks, you may return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now they move to combat. Thalia swings at the Freyalise player. They take the damage. And that is it for the Runetail player. Mana Crypt and Sheoldred trigger on Plarg's upkeep. They sacrifice their commander. They win their flip. Now they play a land for turn. Now they recast their commander Plarg once again. Now they move straight to combat. Let's see where Atali ends up going. It looks like it heads towards the Runetail player. Atali will trigger. Let's hope they don't get anything good off the top of our library. Oh, it looks like they have an Armageddon there. Heroic Intervention and Vryn Windmare. They didn't get anything off of us. And they do cast the Heroic Intervention. Interesting to see if they choose the Armageddon here. They do decide to cast the Vryn Windmare. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. And it looks like they are opting to go for the Armageddon. Alright, interesting play with us having a Sheoldred there. I think we can get out of this better than they can, but we'll soon see. Now, because they did stack it wrong, they could have actually kept their lands around with Heroic Intervention, but because they didn't, they actually lose their lands as well. So that mistake has worked out in our favor really, really well. And that actually has the Freyalise player scoop it up there. So I think they've seen enough. They might feel they won't be able to come back into the game. So now we'll move to our turn. Our Sheoldred will trigger. Grip of Chaos also triggers as well. But there is only one target in our graveyard, so we will get our Plague Crafter back. But for some reason, we didn't actually return it there. I don't know if maybe it's a rules thing that I'm not seeing there, why it didn't actually end up working. Maybe someone who knows the rules better will be able to explain it to me. But anyway, we'll play on. So we'll play our fetch land for turn. It comes into play tapped. Now we'll move to combat. We'll send Ratadrabik as well as Lurrus towards the Plarg player. It looks like the mono white player is also scooped as well. So now it's just us and Plarg. Damage goes through. And that will be our turn done. Sheoldred and Mana Crypt trigger on their upkeep. They sacrifice their commander. They lose the flip. Now they play a land for turn. And they move straight to combat. This game is really going to hinge on what Atali actually pulls off the top of our libraries here. So they swing in towards us. That does trigger Atali. And it looks like they actually get an Owl the Dawn Sky. Not a bad hit at all. Unfortunately for them, we're going to show them the power of Ratadrabik. We're actually going to block with Sheoldred here because we're going to get a token copy of it. They both die. Ratadrabik makes a token copy of Sheoldred, and that is it for their turn. Sheoldred triggers on our upkeep. We're going to choose to bring back our Sheoldred. That triggers Grip of Chaos. So it looks like from what I'm seeing, because we're not actually getting anything back, again, unless I'm getting the rules wrong, it looks like the Grip of Chaos is actually buggering up the Sheoldred trigger there. So that's a little bit of a shame because we definitely probably would have the game by now. All right, well, let's play our next land for turn. Let's crack our first land. We'll put our Godless Shrine into play. We'll have it come into play untapped. We're going to crack our Windswept Heath. We'll put a Plains into play. Now we're going to float 2 white. We're going to cast Brought Back, bringing back the 2 lands that we just sacrificed. So essentially that was a 2 mana spell that ramped us 2 lands. Now we don't have any profitable attacks here, so we're just going to pass the turn over to our opponent. Sheoldred and Mana Crypt trigger on Plarg's upkeep. So they sacrifice that goes back to our graveyard, and they decide to look at the top 7 cards of their library. So let's see what they get off that. It looks like they actually whiff on that, which is really good news for us. But they also win their Mana Crypt flip. They play a land for turn, and that is it for their turn. Our Sheoldred triggers. We'll try targeting Sheoldred again. Grip of Chaos will trigger. Yep, and we get nothing back. We do draw into a Hope of Urborg, so we can play out both cards in our hand. So we'll start by playing Prismatic Vista. Next, we'll move to combat. We'll send everything in. Now we'll crack all of our fetch lands. Then we'll play Mangara, and we'll follow that up with Hope of Urborg. And we should be in a pretty good spot here to hopefully close out the game soon. Sheoldred and Mana Crypt trigger on Plarg's upkeep. They win the flip. They start by playing Arcane Signet, and they're just going to pass the turn there. Sheoldred triggers. We'll just choose Owl for the fun of it. That triggers the Grip of Chaos. We draw a Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. So we'll play that for turn, and let's move to combat and we'll send everything in. That knocks them down to 3. And then to make sure they can't cast non-creature spells until our next turn, we'll sack our Hope of Urborg. Grip of Chaos does trigger. Our commander also triggers. And luckily it does stay on them. And then we'll pass it to the Plarg player. Sheoldred and a Mana Crypt trigger on Plarg's upkeep. Let's see if the Mana Crypt's the thing that kills them. And it is. Alright guys, that was a big game. Let's go to the review and discuss what happened. Well, that was a pretty tough game, and there were a few times I thought the Freyalise player was going to run away with it. But luckily for us, the combined resources of the table was enough to hold them back just long enough until that farewell resolved, which then gave us the time we needed to get ahead. The defining moment of this game, however, was the hits from Atali's triggers. If the Plarg player had resolved them in the correct order, then they could have kept all their lands and been in a strong position to win the game. But here's a question I have for you, the viewers. If the Plarg player had resolved those spells in the right order, do you think they would have been in a better position to win the game than us? Having all their lands would have given them access to a lot more mana, and we don't know what spells they didn't cast because of that lack of mana. But on the other hand, we had a Sheoldred that was bugged, so assuming our Sheoldred did work properly, would that have been enough value to get the job done? Well, that's it from me. We still have one more game of Rata to go, so if you've been enjoying all the shenanigans this deck is capable of, then make sure to stay tuned. But until then, take care guys.